Well, we've got an interesting concept today. We are going to be talking about elk cartridges and what is really big enough. And I have an elk guide here, Tate Bradfield, who claims that you probably need something bigger than a 50 BMG to take an elk. Whoa, now, Mr. Tate, you have got to explain what you're talking about.
I get asked all the time, what is the optimal elk cartridge? And then I also had a guy that was going to come out. He's an influencer. I'm not going to say his name, but he was like, I kind of want to try and shoot an elk with a 50 BMG, but I'll lose all my sponsors because everybody thinks it's unethical to shoot an elk with a 50 BMG. And I was like, well, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but
No.
but it's a free country. You should be able to shoot what you want. But at the same time, I thought, what is the optimal elk cartridge? Because most people in the United States hunt deer, whether it's whitetail or mule deer.
Okay.
Everybody hunts deer.
Sure.
Right? So if we start out at deer, that's something that most people are going to understand. And so if we talk about how much bigger an elk is than a deer, it doesn't really make sense. Most people would say that a great minimum deer cartridge would be a 243, and a great minimum elk cartridge might be a 30-06 or a 300 Win Mag.
But you're saying that doesn't equate?
It doesn't quite equate when you start doing the math.
Well, how are you measuring these things?
Well, let's start out with bullet weight, and then we're going to go on to, let's say, energy, and then we'll go in bullet diameter as well.
Diameter, yeah. A lot of people say you've got to have a wider bullet for elk.
Yeah.
All the things you said is what they say for elk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
so you're
people
saying the 243 is acceptable by almost everybody as a minimal for whitetail.
Yeah.
A lot of guys will say, no, a 223 Remington will work just fine, and
Yeah.
it's been proven to. But let's just stick with this because I think most people would probably say, yeah, that's where you start.
Yep.
243, 100 grain bullet.
100 grain bullet, maybe
Obviously,
3,000 feet a second.
It's quarter of an inch wide,
Yep.
0.24. That's what caliber stands for, 0.24 of an inch. And what sort of energy does that thing produce?
So a 243 going 100 grain bullet, 3,000 feet a second, is going to produce 2,000 feet of energy at the muzzle.
2,000 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle.
Yep.
Now, of course, downrange is where your deer is. You're not
Yes.
shooting them at the muzzle, so you're going to lose that energy.
You are.
And everybody always says, well, you should probably have 1,000 foot-pounds of energy remaining in your bullet when it gets to the target.
400 yards, you're just under 1,000 foot-pounds of energy.
Okay, so the 243 then meets the requirements.
Out to 400 yards, which is basically ethical hunting distances.
All right.
Right.
And now, how big is your deer?
Let's say 150-pound average, because you're going to have bigger deer up towards Canada,
Yeah.
and you're going to have smaller deer in Texas. I mean, in Alabama and some of those places,
Quite
I picked
variable.
up deer that I picked up with one hand, you know? So let's say an average of 150-pound for a deer.
Yeah. And then some of them get bigger, but 243 has been used on all of them. So,
Yes.
okay, there's our standard. Now, how are we going to extrapolate that? We're going to move that up
Yes.
for what is adequate for elk.
So let's start with the bullet weight.
Okay,
Okay, so if we have a 100 grain bullet,
got it.
an elk is roughly 5 times bigger. Sometimes they're bigger than that, but the average elk is between 700 and 800 pounds. Let's say an average
right.
bull elk.
Yeah.
You get some cows that are smaller than that. We shot a cow this year that was ginormous. She's probably 800-pound cow. But you also get some bull elk, depending on where you're at, that are over 1,000 pounds. So let's say an average of 750 pounds. That's
Okay.
5 times bigger than the average 150-pound whitetail.
Okay, so now we need a bullet weight 5 times bigger than 100.
Yes. So we need a
500
500 grain bullet in order to kill an elk. And
who
that's
does that?
minimum.
Yeah, that's
minimum. So minimum should be 500 grain bullet, which you're almost in that 50 BMG area.
Well, actually, this 470 Nitro Express could do it.
That's minimum right there. So you're at a minimum of a 470 Nitro Express for elk.
Let's get realistic.
600
before we go
caliber,
that, what's your other requirement?
So let's talk energy for
Okay.
elk as well.
Yeah, I think that makes
So
more
we got to talk energy for elk too. So the smallest grain you should use is 500 grains for elk. If you're going apples to apples here. And then for energy, this is rough, going about 2,000 foot-pounds at the muzzle.
Okay.
At 400 yards, you're right around just under 1,000 foot-pounds, right?
Let me say it this way. How many people have taken elk with a 30-06? That's all you need.
That's all you need.
165 grain bullet.
Yep. And I have that data here too, because nobody's going to bat an eye at shooting a whitetail with 30-06. Nobody's going to say that's too big.
Yeah.
I would say a lot of people are going to be like, that's the optimal cartridge for hunting in the woods. Maybe not, but a lot of people would say that's a great little cartridge. And I would say it's a great elk cartridge too.
Most people would say it's fine for elk. It's done it many, many, many times.
And you could shoot, and people in Alaska would say it's plenty for grizzly bears. So a 243 at the muzzle is 2,000 foot-pounds.
What's the 30-06?
So a 30-06 would be 3189 at the muzzle.
That's a significant jump up.
Significant jump up. So if we're going apples to apples, the minimum energy you should have at the muzzle for elk is 10,000 foot-pounds of energy.
5 times more than
2,000.
Okay, but what you're getting wrong with the muzzle energy is it really doesn't matter at the muzzle. What's happening downrange?
What happens downrange? Let's say an average of 200-yard shots. Okay, so 243, you're looking at 200 yards, you're looking at 1,405 foot-pounds of energy.
Okay.
With a 30-06, you're looking 2,408. You should be having a 50 BMG to shoot them at 200 yards.
This is crazy, guys.
A 50 BMG at the muzzle to shoot them at 200 yards.
Okay, this is crazy. 300 Win Mag.
Which some people would say is too big for whitetail. Most people would say it's still fine.
Yeah, I mean, some people say you're going to blow them up. It's more than you need, but we're talking elk.
Yes.
So how close is this going to come to be acceptable for elk based on your number system here?
Well, that's like shooting a deer with a 223 maybe, or maybe a 22 long rifle.
So you've gone from your 25 diameter bullet to a 30. That's not a big jump at all.
No.
So that's not going to make it. But what about the energy? You need 1,500 foot-pounds of energy for an elk. They claim.
They claim, which is also funny because if you do the math, they say 1,000 foot-pounds is minimum for deer and 1,500 foot-pounds for elk, but they're 5 times bigger than a deer.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really make sense either.
It should be 5,000 foot-pounds for
right?
elk.
It should be 5,000 pounds minimum for elk.
So we're just sort of all barking up the wrong tree here for all this time. Hey, if you've really been looking forward to coming out west hunting elk, but you really don't know what you're doing and you don't want to waste your time and spin your wheels, you ought to go to Tate's Elk Camp. He teaches you how to shoot down canyons, up mountains, across winds. He shows you real live elk. He just trains you in what to look for elk, how to find elk, everything you really need to know to be an elk hunter. And it doesn't cost all that much. How much?
So we're looking anywhere from $1,750 up to $2,400, depending on how nice of accommodations you want. You can be in a wall tent, which the guys in the wall tents had elk walk right past them last year. And then you could be in a really nice cabin in your own bed with your own shower.
How many days is it?
So it's a 3-day course. It's our elk hunting boot camp. It's coming up in June. And from what I understand, you're going to be there this year too, right? Yeah. So Ron's going to be there. You have to come. And we only have a few spots left. So if you want to come out and learn how to hunt elk with elk hunters in elk country, look us up, processbasedhunter.com. Give us a call.
But what do your numbers say? Obviously, we've already determined that a .30 bullet is not going to be good enough.
So if a .30 bullet is not going to be big enough, for elk, you should, if your minimum diameter for a whitetail is 6 millimeter, then you should be using a 30 millimeter cannon on elk. Okay.
30 millimeter cannon.
So
what is that in caliber in inches?
So that would be 1.215 inches.
And this is a half inch. Your 50 BMG, that is a half-inch diameter bullet.
Yes. Which, when you start doing the math, it kind of gets ridiculous.
This is really crazy.
So I guess what I'm saying, too, is that there's more going on at killing animals than just the bullet diameter.
Gosh, I would say.
Than just the energy and just how much of a grain of a bullet you have going on.
Yeah, the weight of the bullet, the diameter of the bullet, the velocity of the bullet, how much energy is in that bullet, all those things play a role, but you cannot just scale it up that way or you end up, like you said, 50 BMG is not big enough to kill an elk.
It doesn't really make sense, right?
Doesn't make sense. So essentially what we are saying is that if a 243 Winchester with a 100 grain bullet is scaled up, it's the same as the animal sizes would be scaled up, you've got an elk about 5 times bigger than the average deer. So for diameter, your bullet should be, instead of a 24 caliber, it should be
1.21.
That's 1 inch and a quarter. And your bullet weight, instead of 100 grains, should be
500 grains.
500 grains. And your energy in that bullet on target
should be 10,000 foot-pounds of energy.
And you can't even get that in a 50 BMG. So what's the final answer then on determining what you're going to use for elk? What actually kills your elk?
I think that there's a couple of things. One is that it's not necessarily linear. It's not correct in assuming that every animal just needs the same bullet diameter, the same energy 5 times greater to kill an animal 5 times bigger. Because what happens when you shoot an animal with something, there's a pressure wave depending on where you hit it, and they will get a spike of blood to their brain, and that's what makes them pass out or fall down sometimes. Now, that doesn't happen all the time. Even if you do shoot them with a really big gun, sometimes an elk just stays on its feet.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, you got to shoot it twice, and then they go down. But it's just interesting to me. The biggest thing that I found is shot placement. If you make them lose enough blood, they're going to die.
Yeah.
So if you hit them in the right spot, regardless of cartridge, you're going to kill it. We shot a bison with a 22-250 Ackley Improved this year, and it dropped it on the spot.
What?
But we also had somebody shoot it with a 243, shot it 5 times. But it's interesting to me what happens with each cartridge. Mm-hmm. And so when you're going through all these cartridges, what is the best? And I don't know if I know the answer to that, Ron.
Well, I think that's why most of us have agreed on these kind of bare minimums, this 1,000 foot-pounds for a deer, 1,500 foot-pounds for an elk. But then what is your bullet? Does the bullet have the capability of turning those foot-pounds of energy into a mechanical device that will cause hemorrhaging?
Yes.
If you hit them in the heart with, say, a solid bullet that doesn't expand, it's going to take a lot longer for that animal to die because he's not bleeding that much.
Yep.
You've got to break down those tissues, and the best way to do that is with a buzzsaw or shrapnel or something inside that just
creates hemorrhaging.
Creates hemorrhaging, unless you hit the central nervous system, which I think we all know that as well, which is why the 22 long rifle can kill grizzly bear, as has been many times said. You know, that famous woman up in Alaska out berry picking or something. And
that's the only gun you got.
It worked, you know, one shot to the head, you hit the brain. So I think we need to then say we need adequate energy to get our bullet to the target, penetrate to the vitals, expand to tear and rip. I think that's what does it.
Yeah. You're talking the bullet stability, and that's, you know, and here's another thing is when you start talking these numbers, each bullet is going to behave very differently too out of the same cartridge.
Oh, exactly.
And so it's not so much what I've found, it is not so much the cartridge as it is the bullet you use out of that cartridge and the range at which you're shooting at your animal.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would think you would want to select a bullet for elk that has metal bullet or an advanced bullet, controlled round, or controlled
interlock maybe, or a bonded bullet is good.
A bonded bullet or a jacketed bullet with a partition through the middle.
Yes, that's a great one as well.
And then the monometal, like hammer bullets, cutting edge bullets,
CX out of a Hornady.
Hornady. Almost every manufacturer of ammunition now has copper bullets, hollow point copper bullets, because they've been perfected over the last 30 years or so.
Yeah,
and they really do a great job of retaining a lot of mass. I think they're great for bigger animals.
They're great at penetrating, especially if you're going to use a slightly smaller diameter cartridge.
Yeah,
you can get a lot of good penetration out of those bullets out of a monometal bullet.
Now let's talk expansion. Why do we want more expansion in a bullet? In other words, why do you want not a 24 caliber bullet but a 50 caliber bullet, or the 24 to expand to 50?
Because it creates a bigger cutting diameter.
There you go.
Right? It's a bigger wound channel.
Wow, but if you take a 100 grain 24 caliber bullet and you expand it to double that, where does that expansion come from? The shank.
The shank from behind it, yeah.
So you're peeling down the shank and you end up with a big flat mass of pancake penetrating. It's not going to penetrate because it doesn't have any drive behind it.
You have to have
your momentum.
You have to have that fine, happy medium. And that can be... It's hard to know because you don't know what you're shooting. You don't know if you're hitting bone. You don't know if you're hitting straight muscle.
Now you're onto it. This is the big challenge behind bullets, guys, and this is why so many different bullets are out there, and we're always trying to design the perfect bullet because it's impossible. If your bullet expands too much, you've got a bigger hole, but it doesn't go far enough into the animal. If it doesn't expand enough, it goes through the animal without doing much damage, because it was just a tiny little thing, unless you use your 50 BMG to start with, but who wants to carry that around?
To end this, I just want to say, I think that the best elk cartridge, let's say 2 cartridges to pick for the rest of my life, I'd either go 7 Rem Mag or 300 Win Mag per elk.
I would go 300. I'm going to go 7 Rem Mag just because it's what I use and I love it. I know it does it, but honestly, I would have to say the 300 Win Mag or the 300 PRC these days, or any of those big 30 Magnums are great. But I hate to leave the 338 Win Mag out of the conversation.
It's a great one too.
That is just an outstanding elk cartridge.
I don't know. Going down that rabbit hole, it just makes it interesting to think about what we actually think of as ethical and why.
Yeah, and I think anybody who's listening to this will say, well, that was kind of silly, guys, because we all know the 30-06 can do the job. What are we talking about? But it does put it in perspective.
It does.
Because too many people dote on these numbers. You know, they'll just fixate on, you've got to have a bullet with an SD of 3 or higher, or you've got to have at least 200 grains of bullet, or you've got to have this much muzzle. No, guys, there's a lot more involved in it. You can't just take these numbers and scale up like that. It's just kind of silly. So with that in mind, I think it really pays to consider a cartridge that you can handle.
Yes.
Putting that bullet in the right place is going to require you to not flinch, to be able to carry the rifle, not be afraid of it, and all the rest of it. So,
and building up your skills to be able to get within the ethical distance of your chosen rifle.
Bingo.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and regardless what you're shooting, I would say get as close as you can. Yet it never hurts to get closer.
No, I would agree with that.
Yeah, improves everything. All right, so looks like your new next purchase is going to be a 50 BMG, and then you're going to be halfway to what you need for a moose. Well, that was an interesting concept. I'm glad you thought of it, because I would not have. What do you guys think? How big of a bullet do you think you need to kill an elk? How wide does it have to be? How heavy does it have to be? How fast does it have to be going?
What kind of energy are you looking at? Exactly.
Yeah. Let us know. We need answers. In the meantime, everybody should hunt honest.
And shoot straight.
But not necessarily with a 50 BMG?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. See y'all next time. Thanks for listening. So obviously, scaling isn't really what's required to take an elk. We need to think somewhere else.
Yes.
And where else can we think? Not up here today, I tell you that.